I have a message to Iran's rulers. Do not test Israel's determination. I also have a message to the Iranian people. Your enemy is not Israel, but the oppressive regime of tyranny. And when that regime will pass from this world, and it will, our two ancient peoples, the Jews and the Persians, will go back to living in cooperation and brotherhood.
That was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night at a ceremony for Holocaust Remembrance Day. He addressed Iran specifically. Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday called Prime Minister Netanyahu, advised him personally against any further strikes, warning that Israel must respect Syria's sovereignty. The Kremlin also says the leaders discussed Israel's attack. This is a photo of the aftermath on a Syrian airbase this week that killed 14 people. Half of them were Iranian soldiers. Putin says he urged Netanyahu not to risk destabilizing the situation anymore. Syrian state TV hours ago says Assad also warning that any escalation will lead to a downward spiral of destruction. Tensions are high, very much so. Right now in Israel's northern border, Iran is promising to respond to what they call Israel's crime of that missile attack that killed 7 Iranian fighters. Our Pierre Klochendler reports live now from the Golan Heights. Pierre, we know that the army is on high alert. They are bracing perhaps for a strike. Get us caught up on the situation where you are near the border right now.
Yes, well, to paraphrase a famous novel, all is quiet on the Eastern Front right now. There is no sign of tension, to the point that tourists are doing some excursions here and looking at Syrian territory and trying to grasp what they hear on the news. Nonetheless, the army, as you said, is in a very high state of alert. Vigilance is obviously a must in this region. And most residents to whom I spoke told me that there were absolutely no instructions as to what to do in case of a confrontation.
Pierre reporting live there from the border. Situation calm but very tense as the army remains on high alert. Pierre, thanks for that live report. Back in studio, let me turn to our senior Middle East correspondent, Mohammed Al-Kassim. Mohammed, a lot of new updates from world leaders really within the last hour. Perhaps did they, pardon the pun, the word of phrase, or they jumped the gun a little bit. They don't seem to be on the same page when it comes to where to strike in Syria, or when, or even if.
Well, maybe they were at the beginning, but right now we're hearing contradictory statements coming from the White House, from Paris, from almost all of those who came out calling for a military strike, an immediate military strike in response to the alleged chemical attack. We'll start from the latest. French President Emmanuel Macron, who just came out saying that we do have evidence that the Syrian government was behind the chemical attack, but we're not going to act very quickly. We have to wait for more evidence to come out. If you have evidence, why do you have to wait? And wait for whom to give you these further evidence? And
there's evidence, too, that President Trump surprised his own military generals, his own commanders with that tweet saying, we're going to attack.
Absolutely, and that was very confusing. As you know, the military normally is more reserved and more cautious about making statements, attacking anyone, taking on any military actions. And yesterday we had an unscheduled meeting between President Trump and his own Defense Secretary, James Mattis, who most likely have told him, Mr. President, let's just hold off a little bit. And before even meeting the president at the White House, Secretary Mattis did make a statement saying, we are assessing all the information and evaluating it, meaning that maybe the U.S. and the international community doesn't have any conclusive evidence that the chemical attack was carried out by the Syrian government.
Alexander, reports also right now that that the Syrian army, they're moving their equipment, they're moving airplanes and munitions back behind Russian lines so they can be safeguarded against an attack. Where does Russia stand in this? Are they increasing their involvement, their presence to try and ward off an upcoming attack?
Well, I think that Russia, I think that Russia is doing a lot of diplomacy behind the scenes, and that was a good thing that President Putin and President Netanyahu have spoken together. They have a lot of good personal bonds. They respect each other. I think those leaders can find a kind of common ground and solution, despite President Trump and President Putin are not really on good terms. Probably both of them understand that the world is now in a very difficult situation. President Putin faces one of the most worst moments in his presidency as Prime Minister Khrushchev during the Caribbean crisis, as President Yeltsin during the attack of Yugoslavia.
But in the past, Prime Minister Netanyahu did personally warn Putin about strikes that Israel may have been doing in Syria so that there wasn't any kind of confusion. There was close coordination so that Russian personnel weren't killed or equipment that was damaged. That did not happen in this alleged strike. Obviously, the Kremlin's outraged by that. That coordination, has that broken down between Israel and Russia?
I think actually because we're all in a situation of sort of chaos, right, as President Putin yesterday described it, right? It's very difficult, for example, when Israeli officials, I spoke to former officials, have said, Russians, you should worry about, Iranians' intentions, so on. But Russia maybe has pressure on Assad, but definitely does not have that much pressure on Iran, because Iran is a very, I will say, it's a kind of a partner which, definitely plays his own game in Syria.